Well, hey folks, in this Feedback Friday, I'm filming just east of Las Vegas, Nevada, on a lonely stretch of desert highway known for mob history, hidden graves, and more than a few stories about barrels resting quietly on the lake bottom. It's a perfect place to unpack the delusion, the manipulation, and your questions about Chad Daybell. So we're going to walk through your top comments, the biggest legal questions about why Chad is even allowed to write these letters, and whether he could ever profit from them, why he avoids mentioning Lori Daybell, and how his behavior compares to other death row offenders. We're also going to take a detour into Australia for an update on the Mr. Cruel investigation and talk about offender psychology, narrative control, grooming, avoidance patterns, and what delusional self-mythologizing looks like behind bars. Well, hey everybody, I'm Mike King and welcome to another Feedback Friday on Profiling Evil. Now please subscribe if you haven't already and share us with your friends. Today's episode is coming to you from a place with a reputation all its own. It's a sun-baked patch of Nevada desert east of Las Vegas along the shorelines of Lake Mead. And for those of you who know this area, you know exactly why I'm filming this in the middle of the day. I mean, this is the kind of landscape where the buzzards wear sunscreen and where even the tumbleweeds keep moving along just so they don't stick around too long. And here's the truth. I'm not going to hang around here after sunset because the last thing I want to do is be walking around at midnight and run into somebody that's burying a problem that started out on the Las Vegas Strip. This is a place where the mountains stare back at you, and the lake below has been known to hide more than a few mob secrets. And if you look hard enough, you might even spot a barrel or two down there. And let's be honest, if the mob put it there, you don't want to know what's inside. Now listen, I'm traveling back to Utah after speaking at a risk reduction and personal safety conference. It was actually hosted by one of our very own Profiling Evil channel members and my in-house counsel, as I like to tease her, Michelle Morris. And Michelle, I gotta say, you put on one heck of an event. I met some of the finest people I've met from across the United States, including a group that traveled here from Hawaii's Big Island. These are really dedicated people and their work is really necessary. Now, I couldn't help but think that this was the perfect place to stop and answer some of the questions I've received this week about behavior, about threat indicators, victimology, manipulation, and the strange games that people like Chad Daybell are playing from behind prison walls. So I want to talk about everything from cult psychology to constitutional law, from spiritual storytelling to questions about Mr. Cruel in Australia, and all the way back to the victims who deserve to stay at the center of the narrative, not buried under people like Chad Daybell's fantasy writing. And I want to start with some of your comments this week, starting and beginning with @Jams2966, who stated, "Hey, I've been loving your breakdown of these letters." Well, thank you, Jams. I love that you're not reading these letters as entertainment, though, but that you're showing some evidence of this manipulator who's trying to spin a story after the jury finished sending him to death row. Your comment was short and sweet, but it tells me that the analysis is landing exactly where it needs to land, with people like you who want to understand the behavior without losing sight of the victims. And now over to Pancreatitis Fighter, who wrote, "Hey Mike, we also saw that vacant stare that Chad Daybell had. Thanks for sharing the letters in a way that people can remember the victims." Well, Pancreatitis Fighter, that vacant stare you mentioned, I don't think it's an accident. You know, a lot of offenders develop that kind of almost practiced emotional neutrality. It's a way to avoid vulnerability, accountability, and empathy. And you're absolutely right. The only reason to read these letters at all is so that we can understand offender behavior. It's not to elevate it above the memory of people like Tammy or JJ, Tylee, Charles. Now, at Susan1 wrote, I love it. I wish you actually had an AI picture of Chad reading it all. It would seem so real. Good job, my friend. Well, thanks, Susan. I really appreciate it. I'm with you. If AI could capture the full bizarre energy of these letters, the mystical chest pains, the black spirit woman, the prophetic self-importance, wow, the internet might just break. But you never know. Maybe one day we'll animate one of these for the real dramatic effect, and we'll be able to do it using something that sounds a lot like Chad. Now, what's up, Buttercup wrote, okay, this letter just drove me absolutely nuts. I think that there are quite a few medical diagnoses that could very well explain what's been happening with Chad, but of course, he tries to explain everything spiritually to make himself feel special. He has such a weird way of how he interprets things, and he obviously has infused it into his family as well. As a nurse, I'm just screaming out for them to call 911, but no, it was a fiery dart. How about possibly a fiery pulmonary embolism? The stuff he says doesn't even make sense religiously. It's all just so unbelievable. She continues, I will never forget all the victims in this and just what he did to cause it. Thank goodness he's in prison on death row. And thanks, Mike, for all your research, and I hope all goes well for you medically. Well, thanks a lot, Buttercup. Every medical professional that I've spoken to reacts in almost the same way that you did. Like real symptoms to spiritualized, real danger, mystified, real pathology, sanitized. That's the playbook here. When somebody reframes physical collapse as heaven's messaging system, it's not spirituality. It's disassociation from reality. And it's a deliberate rewrite designed to keep him, the writer, at the center of this cosmic drama that he's inventing. So thanks a lot, Susan. Now, Hot Raptor said, hey, thank you for your comments on these awful letters. I don't think that he should have any right to speak after being found guilty, and I appreciate your explanation so the public is aware of his sickening effort to change the narrative. Well, I'll tell you what, thank you, Hot Raptor, because this is exactly why I analyzed these letters. Not to give this guy a platform, but to expose the manipulation embedded in them. Because silence in the face of manipulation just flat becomes permission from us. Well, thanks to all of you who sent in these great comments. Let's dig into a few of the questions, but I want to remind you, you can send your comments to profilingevil@gmail.com, or you can pick up your mobile device and record yourself asking the question, upload it with the link that's down below, and we'll play your recording on the air. So, at Danielle1968 wrote, Mike, why are these letters being allowed? Well, Danielle, you asked the question that keeps showing up over and over. Why can a convicted murderer who's on death row send out spiritual fan fiction like this? Well, the short answer, and I'm going to try to unpack it carefully, is frankly this. People like Chad Daybell, even as a convicted killer, still have First Amendment rights. It's limited and monitored, yeah. Restricted even, yeah. But he's still got rights, even from within those prison walls. And court precedent really matters here. It's not even optional. Because in a U.S. Supreme Court ruling in 1987, it's titled Turner versus Safley, the court established that prisons can restrict inmate speech only if the restriction is reasonably related to legitimate operational interests. Things like safety, security, order to prevent criminal activity. It doesn't allow prisons to silence inmates just because people don't like what they're saying. So unless Chad's letters contain threats or escape plans, criminal instructions, contraband, operational risks, They fall into the allowed but monitored category. And this matters behaviorally because Chad is using these letters to do the only thing he has left to do: try to control the narrative. This guy can't control the autopsy reports. He can't control the digital evidence. He can't control the fact that shallow graves were uncovered on his property, and those graves contained the bodies of J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan. He can't control the verdict, and he can't control the sentence. But what he can control is the story that he's telling himself and attempting to tell everybody else. Now, Son of Sam laws and Idaho's version of that provide a little bit of bite, but not a lot. Now, Danielle also asked whether these letters could eventually become a book. And the frustrating answer is yes, they certainly can. But Idaho has a notoriety for profit statute that's kind of cool. This prohibits a convicted offender from financially benefiting from their crimes. Now, under these rules, any profits go into a state-controlled escrow account. And that's a place where victims can actually attach to them. And restitution takes priority on the money. And usually, the offender will never see a dime. So yeah, somebody like Chad could publish letters. But Chad, in my opinion, isn't buying new commissary radios with the royalties. That's the legal side of things. So let's talk a little bit about the psychological side. Because convicted offenders often create these grand narratives from prison. And in this case, Chad's version is more spiritual, apocalyptic, maybe even self-enhancing. He's grooming an audience, not for sex, but for sympathy. And sympathy is still a form of power. Now, in another really interesting question, at Fortitude Vale asked this question: is Chad unique in writing stories from death row? And the short answer is no. The long answer, though, oh boy, let me pull up a chair if I had one here. A lot of death row offenders become writers. Some publish memoirs. Others turn religious. And some frame themselves as prophets, such as Chad is doing. Now, some discover deep philosophy, while others might claim innocence through symbolism. Now, what Chad brings to the table is a flavor of his delusions, not the fact of it. He blends his near-death experiences and magical thinking together. He pulls prophetic destiny backed by apocalyptic language and self-importance together. His letters are filled with righteous overtones and, by design, a total denial of responsibility. I mean, have any of you heard him say, "I did it," or "I'm sorry"? It's the same old behavior, but he's wearing a brand new costume. He can't control the evidence, so he has to try to control the interpretation. And this is classic offender psychology. Now, at Cynthia the Rembrandt, and I hope I got that right, 158, she asks, does Chad Daybell ever mention Lori Daybell? Not yet. Not in any letters so far. And that absence is really revealing. It leaves us asking why he avoids her. And I think the answer is pretty simple. You see, mentioning Lori pulls the spotlight back to the motive, the planning, the conspiracy, the jealousy, the marriage timelines, the suspicion. Chad wants to be the misunderstood widower who has spiritual experiences that are misunderstood by the rest of us. Mentioning Lori Daybell only ruins his storyline. And I want to just take a quick question from Kathy, because I'm really glad she asked this. And before I jump in, let me apologize first, Kathy. I meant to include your question while I was out filming in the Nevada desert, but once I got back to the house, I realized I hadn't done it. And I didn't want this one slipping through the cracks because it's an important question, and it shows that you're thinking about victimology and these case parallels in a really smart way. So thanks for sending this in. Now here's what Kathy wrote me, folks. She said, "Hey, good morning, Mike. First, let me say how much I enjoy your videos. Thank you so much. The similarities between JJ and Ty and Melody Buzzard are stark. Idaho arrested Lori for failure to produce the children, along with desertion and non-support. Do you think California can or will do the same with Melody's mother. Thanks for a great show. I really enjoyed it, Kathy. Well, Kathy, you're absolutely right. The parallels between the Daybell-Vallow investigation and what we're seeing in the disappearance of little 9-year-old Melody Buzzard are unsettling. And anytime a parent can't or won't produce their child, investigators should start looking at two things immediately. Number one, the timeline of the last verifiable contact and parental responsibility. Now, Idaho had a very specific statutory pathway when they arrested Lori Vallow. It covered felony injury, desertion, neglect, those kinds of things. And failure to produce the child after a lawful demand is what they actually got her on. That's what brought her into custody quickly, especially since she fled to Hawaii. That charge also allowed prosecutors to hold her before homicide charges were filed. So the natural question is, can California do the same thing with Ashley Buzzard? And here's the breakdown. California does, yes, they do have a child endangerment statute. But here's the challenge. California doesn't have a direct equivalent to what Idaho's explicit failure to produce a child after lawful demand charge. Now, at least what I've found. That doesn't mean California is limited, though. It just means that they might have to take a slightly different legal road to get where they want to go. And here's what investigators in California could do, in my opinion. They can arrest on child endangerment or neglect if they can prove that the parent created risk or failed to protect the child. Number two, they could charge obstructing an investigation if the parent has lied or destroys evidence or interferes with law enforcement. Three, they could pursue charges related to false imprisonment or conspiracy or accessory after the fact. And number four, they could detain Ashley Buzzard on unrelated probable cause charges like they tried to do, but it didn't work. She's out on her own. Now here's the key difference between Idaho and California. If I'm reading the statutes correctly, California can arrest a parent solely because they refuse to produce the child, unless the investigators can simultaneously prove that there's neglect or risk or an obstruction. So in Melody's case, police are clearly building a timeline, and they're carefully documenting contradictory behavior. They're watching the digital footprint and the travel patterns, the plate tampering, the failure to produce consistent explanations. Those are all really big red flags, but they don't equate to charges. So Kathy, you're asking the right questions, because this is exactly the kind of thing that investigators should be doing to evaluate this case. They have to know, does the behavior itself constitute risk or harm or obstruction? Now, if the answer is yes to those questions, then absolutely California could make an arrest even before this child's found. I mean, we saw it with the Cal City boys, the Wests, Harmony Montgomery, even go back to Casey Anthony, and as you noted, the Lori Vallow pattern that we saw. So the question is, will California do it? And I think if the evidence reaches the threshold, that yes, they will. And honestly, when we look at the mounting behavior, the multi-state travel, the evasiveness, the inconsistencies, and the fact that Melody still hasn't been produced, I wouldn't be surprised if law enforcement isn't already preparing that step. So your instincts are spot on, and I'm really grateful you sent it in. I'm sorry I didn't get it out in the filming in the dirt out on the desert, but I wasn't about to let this question get lost in the desert dust. Hey, thanks, Kathy, and keep the questions coming. And now let's shift the geography a little, and let me tell you, folks, I could use this location to say I'm actually filming in Australia, because the scenery is really similar, especially if you're out near Ayers Rock. Now, Nettie wrote and asked about a serial killer case in Australia that I've done some work on. It's the unsolved murder case of Mr. Cruel. She asks, has there been any additional headway in that case? And could his fixation, Mr. Cruel's fixation, on power stations, and she's talking about the fact that he committed many of these assaults and homicides near power stations, be symbolic instead of professional? Well, Nettie, I think it's a great question, and yeah, There have been some real updates in the last 6 to 12 months. Specifically, get this, a forensic physician recently revealed that he collected viable biological evidence from one of the early victims, and that the evidence still exists in police evidence lockers. Now, investigators have quietly confirmed that a DNA profile does still exist in one of the connected cases. And Australian media outlets are reporting that several suspects remain under active review. And if you know something about this case, folks, remember there's $1 million reward that's still active. But here's a little spoiler alert. The $1 million is in Aussie money, so you're really only going to get $648,950 here in the U.S. But with some budgeting, you could still have a lot of fun on that kind of cash. So listen, if we talk about the psychology of the power station fixation, it's always been an interesting thing to point out that many of the crime scenes aligned with power corridors, substation access roads, and utility easements. It might be a coincidence since these areas are really quieter places. They're low traffic areas, unmonitored travel lanes, so to speak. And that would be ideal for somebody who understands terrain and wants a quiet place to commit their crimes. So is it symbolic? I guess possibly. I mean, predators often fuse imagery, this power, control, electricity domination, into their fantasy lives. But practically, I don't know. I think the corridors gave him mobility, predictability, escape routes, isolation, privacy. Now, whether they're symbolic or practical, I don't know. But they certainly served his needs in this case.
Mike King, what is your gut instinct about the fourth victim, Carmen Chan?
I see some things that are similar. The victim selection process, the age of this victim, the manner of breaking into the house, but I'm not sure that the aggressive dragging her by her hair out of the house, unless he's completely unraveling, fits that. I'm not sure that the execution fits it, even if he were to choose to murder this child. 3 times is a lot of bullets to shoot.
Carmen's remains were found near the Thomastown Terminal Station, which connects to the smaller substations near where Mr. Cruel's other victims lived or were dumped. And again, we hope our map linking these locations may ignite the memory of a potential witness.
There's a lot of coincidences there.
But you look at coincidences,
You do.
don't you?
They just don't happen. And that's why you look at the crime scenes, the locations, as Mike has put, it becomes quite significant in relation to tying it all in.
But I might say too, I don't really believe in coincidences to this level of intensity. It's a hell of a coincidence if it is a coincidence.
Mike, do you believe it's just a coincidence?
I do not believe in coincidences, no. There's reasons why he selected those locations to drop off those victims. There are absolute reasons why he selected the victims he did.
So thanks, Nettie. And on a personal note, I want you to know I love Wasilla. One of my closest high school buddies who I still remain in contact with lives there. And I always think about travel in your direction, especially when the sockeye salmon are running. And by the way, wasn't Sarah Palin from your neck of the woods? Now, standing out here under the beautiful overcast sky today, talking about serial offenders, manipulative writers, cult-adjacent belief systems, and predatory behavior, I'm kind of reminded of something that I said at the conference today. Predators thrive where there are blind spots. And blind spots can come in all shapes and sizes. They can be physical. It can be psychological, religious, emotional, geographic, legal, and even social. And that's why examining Chad's letters or any offender's writings is important. Not because we want to celebrate it, but because we want to understand how manipulation can hide inside language. And as I'm standing here thinking about the irony of this setting, I reflect again on the lessons of Chad Daybell's case. I think about things like the fact that predators don't need darkness to operate. They create their own kind of shadows. And sometimes criminals like Chad Daybell do it through letters while he's hiding in plain sight. They use inside spiritual language, things like the near-death experiences, mystical metaphors, things that distract from the raw brutality of what actually happened. You know, the beauty out here, it doesn't lie. There aren't shadows deep enough to hide a barrel, or a shallow grave, or a conspiracy if you know where to look. But offenders, they always try to hide anyway. They build these elaborate narratives, stories of destiny, divine battles, portals, spiritual guides, fiery darts, and anything to cover up the truth that they can't bring themselves to say. The truth, I did this. I'm responsible. Maybe even I'm sorry. But let's get back into your questions and the behavior behind these letters, because what you wrote this week was thoughtful. It was emotional, and in some cases, it was downright funny. I mean, I really love this community because this is a part where I want to zoom in on something that most people missed. Chad isn't writing these letters to communicate, he's writing them to control. And when an offender is sitting on death row, there's no audience, there's no followers, there's no conferences, no church cultural halls, no firesides, no preparing gatherings, and they start losing the thing that they value most. And the thing they value most isn't freedom. It's not mobility, even. It might not even be their influence. I think it's their identity, because somebody like Chad, the visionary, the chosen one, the author, the leader, the spiritual guide, losing his audience is losing oxygen. So what does he do? He recreates the audience. And these letters are his stage. The readers, us, are the congregation. This fantastical language is his sermon, and his near-death experiences are his testimony. That story of fiery darts, heck, they're parables. And the victims, well, they're not even in the frame, because he erased them a long time ago from his internal story. But here's where your comments shine, because you refuse to forget the victims. You refuse to be distracted by the theatrics. You refuse to treat this like a creative writing experience, because you're seeing the manipulation for what it is. And that's exactly what a good investigator does. When you wrote things like "this letter drove me nuts," or "he's using spiritual explanations instead of medical ones," things like "he tries to make himself feel special," or "he ignores the victims," you're identifying exactly the behavioral patterns that investigators look for in these kinds of criminals. These are people who rewrite their history, they rewrite their motives, they rewrite their identity, and they try to rewrite the crime, and we cannot allow that to happen. In fact, let me show you something. Every one of your comments this week pointed to at least one of these classic offender traits of self-aggrandizing narratives, like when Chad puts himself at the center of dramatic spiritual events because it's elevating him above the reality of being a condemned killer, or his attempt at minimizing his wrongdoing. I mean, did you catch how he references chest pains or fiery darts, but he never talks about the murder of Tammy, JJ, or Tylee? He spiritualizes everything around him so that he doesn't have to moralize anything. And you all called it out immediately. And I am so proud of you, because you're seeing beyond what he's saying. It's not what's being said, it's what's not being said that's important. That's what I love about the Profiling Evil community. You seem to look a little beyond the surface. Now, Cynthia asked whether Chad mentions Lori in the letters, and the answer is no, not in any meaningful way that I can see. And that silence roars loudly. You see, people who write mythological versions of themselves don't introduce or even include characters who contradict the myth they're creating. Lori's existence represents motive, conspiracy, planning, jealousy, radicalization. It represents the relationship that prosecutors described as the accelerant for 3 murders. Now, Chad wants the story of Chad the spiritual seer to come out, not Chad, the man who married Lori Daybell 2 weeks after Tammy died, while JJ and Tylee were buried on his property. You see, removing Lori from his letters is not accidental. it's engineering. And the people who deserve our attention are JJ, Tylee, Tammy, Charles, even Brandon. And what about Joe Ryan? Their lives were stolen from them. Their memories were manipulated. Their stories were rewritten by the people who harmed them. And that's why we need to keep the focus where it belongs. Chad might keep writing. Who cares? But the victims deserve to be the ones remembered. Offenders always think they're being more clever than they really are. They think they're clever when they write these fantasy letters. They think they're clever when they construct alternate identities. They think they're clever when they assume that nobody is tracking their behavior. But like sunlight, literal and investigative, tracking changes everything. So thanks for being here on this Feedback Friday. And thanks for sticking with me through the wind, the heat, the lizards, the possibility that somewhere out here under these rocks, there might be a mob story that the desert hasn't told. Stay connected with me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And jump over to profilingevil.com where you'll find story maps, case breakdowns, our missing persons and unsolved homicides map, and our digital newsletter. And don't forget my books, Deceived, She Knew No Fear, and Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. They support our scholarship funds, and they help keep Profiling Evil alive. And most of all, stay safe, stay curious, and stay aware. I'm Mike King from Profiling Evil. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.